game worlds freeze the moment the players walk away. The villain's in his lair, sharpening his sword, waiting. The political crisis is simmering at the exact same temperature it was 3 sessions ago. And it will stay that way until your players show up, because that's when things are allowed to happen, right? I've been running games for over a decade, and the single biggest upgrade I ever made to my campaign had nothing to do with rules or encounter balances, or getting better at voices. It was actually when I stopped letting the world wait for my players. That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Not living worlds, that's a different thing, and I'll explain why in a second. But world momentum, the feeling that the future is arriving whether your players are ready for it or not. The problem I have with living worlds is that a world can be detailed and active and immersive and absolutely packed with life, and still be completely static. When most GMs talk about running a living world, what they actually mean is there are NPC schedules, the blacksmith opens at dawn, the guards are out patrolling every hour, you've got lore in the library and ambient chatter in the tavern, a dozen named shopkeepers with backstories nobody will ever read, the world feels inhabited. And you know what? That's great, but it's not momentum. There is a distinction between the two. Busy is not the same as moving, just as detail isn't the same as progression. And it's the same with activity, it isn't history. NPCs running on a schedule are activity, yes, but momentum is history happening. The easiest way to see this is to look at Skyrim. The game is packed with life, NPCs have routines, there's political drama, religious conflict, a dragon apocalypse. The world is extraordinarily detailed, and yet the Stormcloak Rebellion waits for you, just like Alduin's waiting for you. Every quest just sits there in amber until you walk over and touch it. The world exists, but it almost never develops independently. You could ignore every main quest for 100 hours and come back to find nothing had changed. Nazim is still asking about your time in the Cloud District. That's a theme park world, incredibly impressive to look at, full of all these moving parts, but nothing actually goes anywhere without you. Flamey, what do you mean when you say world momentum? Let me give you a proper definition, viewers. World momentum is the feeling that the future is arriving whether the players are ready for it or not. And here's the key mental shift. Your players are not the starting engine of the campaign. They are boarding something already moving. Think about it this way. The world exists before they show up. It has pressure already in motion. Economic, political, environmental, social. It has ongoing collisions that started long before session 1, and it continues moving when they're off screen. When they're resting, when they're haggling over a cart horse in a market town. The players influence momentum. They do not generate all movement. That's where we draw the line. In a world with real momentum, factions are pursuing goals regardless of what the party is doing. Villains are continuing their plans, rulers are making decisions. Environments are deteriorating. Economies are shifting. The world isn't a theme park that powers down at close time. It's a machine with its own inertia. And consequences compound. Small events grow into enormous ones when you give them time. A goblin raid on a farming village isn't just a random encounter. It's the first domino. Farmers flee to the city. Food prices spike. The law raises taxes to fund the military response. Merchants start bribing the guards instead of paying those taxes. The city guards get lazy and corrupt. Bandits move into the power vacuum on the roads. Now your players are traveling through a region that feels genuinely destabilized. And they can trace every piece of it back to a goblin raid they maybe didn't even deal with. Plague rumors become quarantines, political tension becomes civil unrest. That monster that the party ignored because it was off the critical path has now driven traders off the eastern road entirely, and there's a whole town that's basically cut off. Momentum requires casualty. That's the engine, not the GM randomly escalating things, but of course this happened. Look at everything that led here. The other thing momentum does is something I call re-entry shock. When your players return somewhere they've been, a town, a region, an NPC's home, it should feel like time's passed. There should be visible changes, altered relationships, a building that went up or burned down. An NPC who's angrier or sadder or more powerful than before. Players infer that a world is real from visible transformation. A world that looks the same every time you visit is a painting, not a place. And then there's what I think of as the weight question. Momentum only works when events have enough weight to keep moving after the players leave. Not every random encounter needs to ripple forwards, but your major factions and your key NPCs and central conflicts, those need to have mass, stakes, and continuity, even history. You might be thinking, okay, but do players actually notice? Does it really matter if the Goblin Raid doesn't have consequences? Yes, they notice. Maybe not consciously at first, but they figure it out. Players are incredibly good at running implicit experiments on the game world. They'll rest for a week and see what happens. They'll deliberately delay dealing with a threat and watch the response. or poke at the world's edges to see if it pushes back. And when they learn that nothing escalates, that danger doesn't compound, that quests wait forever, they adapt, urgency disappears, and the immersion weakens, and strategy flattens into what's the most efficient quest order, instead of anything with real stakes. Once your players have figured out that the world is a theme park, you've lost something that is very hard to get back. But here's the flip side, and this is what I love about Momentum. When players realize opportunities can disappear, threats can worsen, and that factions are moving independent of them, the entire emotional texture of the campaign changes. They stop asking what's the optimal quest order, and instead what can we afford to lose. The other thing static worlds do is erase failure, and that's actually a huge problem because failure is where the best stories live. In a static campaign where the players fail to stop something, they fail to rescue someone, or ignore a warning or abandon a region, it just gets smoothed over and the world resets and the threat scales back. The GM fudges things to keep the plot on track, and so failure becomes meaningless. Players learn that nothing they do or don't do actually echoes forwards. Momentum preserves failure. That rescue that they didn't pull off, the person is gone, and the consequences of their absence ripple out. That warning they ignored, it compounded into something worse. The region they abandoned has changed in their absence in ways that are genuinely painful to come back to. It's almost like a world without momentum is protecting the players from history. Without momentum, time is decorative. It exists on the calendar, sessions pass, in-world weeks go by, but none of it costs anything. With momentum, every rest matters, every journey consumes opportunity, and every delay reshapes events. It turns time back into a resource, and once time is a resource, every decision has weight. And this isn't something that I have invented, it's baked into basically every piece of long-form storytelling you've ever found genuinely gripping. The Wire is the obvious one. The institutions in that show, the police department, the drug trade, the schools, the docks, the newspapers, they outlive individual characters, they keep moving, nobody controls the machine, characters push against it, get eaten by it, try to reform it, but the machine just continues. The world feels larger than the protagonist because it is. The camera is not causing Baltimore to exist, it's trying to catch up to it. Children of Men does the same thing at a civilizational scale. The collapse is already underway when the film starts, the history has been moving for years before Theo gets pulled into it. The world is completely indifferent to him as a protagonist. It would have kept collapsing with or without his involvement, and you feel that at every moment. A Song of Ice and Fire, the book specifically, is a masterclass in this. Wars continue happening off-page while we're following different characters, and the central tragedy of the series is that the characters consistently delay action. Ned Stark's honor, Rob's tactical mistakes, everyone's political maneuvering, and those delays create catastrophe. The world doesn't stop and wait for them to be ready, it just keeps moving, and the gap between their readiness and the world's momentum is where all the tragedy lives, you know? In games like Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl, has a life system where NPCs are moving around fighting and dying and completing objectives entirely off screen. You can stumble across the aftermath of a battle that happened with no player involvement. The zone feels inhabited because it is inhabited by things that don't care about your playthrough. The Shadow of Mordor's Nemesis system does something similar. Enemies evolve, form social hierarchies, remember you, and get promoted or killed in your absence. Histories form between encounters, and you come back and the political landscape of the Orc armies has genuinely shifted because of things that happened while you were elsewhere. The camera isn't causing the world to move, it's trying to catch up to it, which is the exact feeling you want your players to have. So why do most campaigns end up static? I'd argue it's a structural problem in how most GMs prepare. You write stories and plots, and have a beginning, a sequence of scenes, an escalation, and a climax. And the problem with a pre-written story is that events cannot progress naturally without breaking the script. So the villain can't actually burn the city in session 3, because the city is where Act 2 takes place. A cult can't complete their ritual early because that was supposed to be the session 8 confrontation. Everything freezes in place to protect the story's shape. Static worlds are often just stories waiting for actors. The fix is to stop prepping stories and start prepping situations. The difference here is that a story has an outcome I already know, and a situation has pressures I'm tracking. Instead of planning what happens, ask yourself, what does the villain want? What's their plan if nobody intervenes? And what resources do they have? And what are their limits? Or what pressures already exist in the region that are completely separate from the villain's agenda? And now what happens if the players show up? And what happens if they don't? The outcome is not predetermined, you are genuinely finding out. For NPCs, I stopped writing character arcs and started tracking motives. Every Every significant NPC in my campaigns has a goal, a resource they're using to pursue it, a limit they won't cross, usually, and a fear that shapes their decisions. That's it, 4 things. And from those 4 things, behavior emerges naturally in response to whatever the players do. Whatever momentum the world generates, I don't need to write their arc because their arc happens at the table. The beautiful thing about running this way is that the story emerges from collision. When factions with competing goals and independent resources start bumping into each other and into players, you get betrayals, alliances, and callbacks, and escalating stakes that feel earned because they are earned. They're basically the natural result of the systems colliding, not because I scripted a twist, because I set things in motion and let them run. This is what some game designers call play to find out. The GM discovers the story alongside the players, and the payoff happens at the table, not in your notes. But enough philosophy talk. Here's what this looks like in practice. For factions, I keep it simple. Every faction gets one goal, one obstacle to their goal, and one dangerous method they're willing to use. That's enough to generate behavior for months of play. You don't need 40-page document, you need to know what they want, what's in their way, and how far they'll go to remove it. Between sessions, I ask myself 6 questions. What changed? Who moved closer to their goal? What got worse because nobody addressed it? What spread or escalated? What collapsed or fell apart? And what new pressure emerged from all of that? It literally takes me about 15 minutes now because I've done it for so long. For random counters and minor events, I've trained myself to treat nothing as filler. That bandit gang that the players scared off in session 2, they're a rumor in session 5. One of them shows up as a recurring NPC. The route they were controlling has a power vacuum now. Nothing is filler forever, and everything can become a thread. Crucially, and this is something a lot of GMs miss, you have to telegraph momentum. Players need visible warning signs before consequences arrive. Rumors, troop movements, refugees moving in unusual directions, price changes in markets, environmental shifts, tension in people's faces. Momentum works best when players can see why things are changing, so they feel like agents in the world rather than victims of it. If the city falls and they had no warning signs, that's not really momentum. The world also has to push back. Momentum requires resistance, or it just becomes a power fantasy where the players stomp everything and the world cheerfully accommodates them. Winter closes mountain passes. The enemies adapt their tactics after the 3rd ambush. Factions retaliate when the party damages their interests and panic spreads through the city after a public disaster. Even stuff like shortages get worse when supply lines are disrupted. The world is not a puzzle that waits patiently to be solved, it's a system with its own inertia. And the last shift, the one that maybe changed my prep more than anything else, is I stopped planning stories and started tracking pressure. Where is pressure building? What's about to collide? What instability is approaching a tipping point? What has been neglected long enough that it's gonna get loud? If you think in pressure, escalation, and instability, and approaching collisions, instead of in scenes and story beats and predetermined outcomes, it's not only quicker in the long run, it also puts less pressure on you as a GM to try and keep yourself on script, make changes to your story because the players did something unexpected. You don't know what the players are gonna do, so you shouldn't know the outcome. You should figure it out when they do. Of course, you still need to create your world and all the people inside of it and everything that's going on, but when the game actually starts and things start to move forwards, it's a huge weight off your shoulders having to come up with ideas every session. You're figuring it out alongside the players. You have your points about who your villains are and who the NPCs are and how the world responds to things. You're playing the game alongside them, figuring out how things are going to progress, and then you just write down your notes afterwards about where things are headed based off of the session's outcome. So how do you run games? Are you a plotter? Are you a person who uses situations and pacing? Does your world have momentum when no one's around? If you're a player, how does your GM do this, and what's your experience with living worlds and consequences and things changing while you're not there? Leave a comment below and let's get debating. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay spicy adventurers.